Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's LinkedIn Live session. I'm Anthony Rose with Ideas, and I'm joined today by Clément with Oaky. Clément, thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to be talking about Beyond the Room, how to rethink revenue and guest engagement. How are we going to elevate our hotels, not only from being able to maximize our revenues, but creating the best guest experience possible from an entire commercial strategy team perspective. Clément, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. That's really an honor, and I'm super humbled and excited about this conversation. This is a topic I'm passionate about. I know that you're quite passionate about it too, so I think this is going to be interesting, hopefully for our listeners.
Absolutely, yeah. Clément and I have had many conversations about how can we truly create the total experience for the guest and at the same time create the total value of the guest for the hotel and optimize that. And so, Clément, I'd love to hear a little bit from you in terms of how did you get started with Oaky, and ultimately, what about Oaky brought you into this world of maximizing profitability and total guest value?
Yeah. So listen, the journey started about 8 years ago now. It's actually quite funny because I'm a trained chef, so I actually studied hospitality. I think that's another thing we might have in common. But I'm really into food and beverage. So that's really what my kind of classical training was. And from there, I went through working in hospitality. I ended up in food and beverage in a beautiful luxury hotel around here in Amsterdam. And my very first task as back then a management trainee was to develop an upselling program for the restaurant, which was very interesting and something completely new to me. But it directly spoke to me because to me, upselling was really kind of putting together revenue management, which is something I was always very intrigued and excited already as a student and moving forward even more. And the guest experience, right? Actually, that creativity that you create, as well as the engagement that you have both with the guests and with the teams. So that's, well, quite some time ago. Moving forward, kind of kept the experience in the hotel industry and slightly outside of it. Went to work for an online travel agency based out of Amsterdam, which is not the big blue. There is a couple more. And definitely learned a lot about demand and kind of what guests actually want by creating packages that would be very tailored. And from there, now 8 years ago, I was the very first employee to join a very tiny company back in the day, Oaky, which had about 63 customers. So it was really just starting and focused on upselling. So that was kind of really bringing this passion to help hotels, not just fill beds, but actually make them thrive. And I think this is really what excited me from the get go with the mission that we set up to do in doing this in a fun way, in an automated way, in a smart way. And 8 years later, here we are working with a bit more than 3,000 hotels, partnering with the greatest leaders in the revenue space, ideas, of course. And yeah, again, once very humbled to be able to speak on this stage and hopefully bring a little bit of expertise, insights on what can upselling bring to the hospitality industry in general, but also hotels and hotel teams in particular.
Fantastic. And one thing that we talked about is really the untapped potential of the guest post booking. And so when we have guests that are coming to our hotels, they are typically coming to experience a destination. There are some guests that just want a room and they just want a place to lay their head, but oftentimes they want to come experience the destination. They want to experience the hotel. How can we be better as an industry? And from your experience, both in food and beverage as well as the early days in the hotels, how can we be better at offering more than just a room? And what have you seen the industry evolve for that?
What's so interesting is that you're saying some guests are still only looking for a room. I actually don't believe that's true. I think there is always a reason behind the stay, but with the hotel specifically, at that moment, they might only be expecting a room. And I think this is where things are able to be turned around. I think it's fair to say that nowadays guests, regardless of the purpose of travel, are actually looking for experiences. They are also looking for co-creation. They want to bring um, their own spin to things. They want to feel like they were included in at least the planning of the travel, everything is self-service nowadays. It's very rare that you would actually travel into a destination because you were told to, and everything was, packaged and ready for you. So I think there is an aspect of control that we're seeing is very, very strong when it's about really crafting an experience entirely. And again, regardless of the purpose of travel, even if you're going for business on a city that you maybe have never discovered, sure, your days might be very, very full with whatever you're going for, client meetings, trade shows, or whatever other purpose. But that morning, maybe that night, maybe that afternoon break, you will actually want to explore the surroundings. You actually want to kind of bring your own desire to also create a memorable stay. Because at the end of the day, this is really what guests are looking to do. And that's an untapped potential from hotels that are simply and only offering basically a bed. Because especially when we use memorable, right? When was the last time you traveled and you remember your stay at the hotel because the bed was amazing?
I don't think I can say that. Yeah.
Probably not. Like guests really remember the view of the hotel. They might remember some amenities, the size of it, for sure. But literally only the bed, which is so important, right? You have to have it right. But that's probably not what will be the best memory of the last day of the guests.
Yeah. And creating those memorable experiences is what creates loyal repeat guests that often bring a higher value to the property too.
And I think this is what's so interesting as well. When we look at, so Oaky is present across the globe, right? So that means that we also have a fairly good understanding of the different trends that we're seeing depending on the markets. And one thing that we're seeing very, very strongly in the US is incredible focus on rooms and rooms first. What that means is that obviously the highest profit margins are on rooms. We know that this is no rocket science. But by only focusing on rooms, that also means that there is an entire piece of the guest journey, of the guest experience, that you're actually not covering. Some needs that you're not answering. And what that means is that if you are not answering them as a hotelier, well, another part, another piece of the journey of the travel will capitalize on it and will actually create that memorable experience instead of you, when that could have been you.
Yeah. And you're right. So I grew up most of my career in Las Vegas, where that total guest value and that total guest experience is a focus. There's always opportunity to grow that. But a lot of the US, this is a mentality switch. And especially for the revenue leaders in the US, a lot of times we look at the metrics of our room revenue as this is our goal, this is what we can impact. But making that mentality switch to total revenue, and this is a topic that has been talked about at length at many of the conferences in the last 5 years. When you make that mentality switch, it's perceived as a change, and sometimes change can be difficult, especially in some of the larger groups that we have in the US. What would you say would be the first 1 to 3 steps that would be necessary to make that mentality switch, to make that change within a larger organization?
Very interesting. Well, I think it starts from the top. You mentioned metrics, right? I think a lot of incentives, a lot of bonuses, a lot of compensations are still tied to revenue-only metrics. So as long as your director of revenues are incentivized, targeted on RevPAR and RevPAR only, then it's really hard to actually make that shift happen. So the first one is include more metrics that matter, right? The ones that move the needles. TrevPAR, GOP par, that's actually looking at the total profitability rather than just that layer of rooms. I would start there. I think the second piece is also realizing that this is a big change. Potentially, this is a big culture change. So approach this with change management too. So don't try to change absolutely everything at once and absolutely everybody at once. There will be people that will very much will be slowing down and not ready for this. So accept that, kind of adapt to it, but still continue piece by piece in making these gradual changes. And I think the third one, it's very much about monitoring, reporting, and kind of understanding the impact this has. And for this also means using the right systems, the right tools that also very much highlight, pinpoint what are the efforts that were actually achieved, and looking at a TREFPA progression, TREFPA impact. This is something that we're looking at incorporating in our tool, simply because this is really the real added value of upsell, of ancillary, is that bottom line addition, that is, can actually make profitability, and make a budget for 1 month or one specific year.
Yeah, and that's one thing that is exceptionally important, and we hear all the time, both from independent hotels as well as branded, is ownership always is constantly increasing the budget and on our targets. And so when we look at the avenues that we can use to get there, often it is increasing RevPAR, it's increasing ADRs, things of that nature that we're using as revenue leaders to try to target that. But so often it's untapped in terms of the upsell potential of our properties and the experiences that we potentially offer. And so when we look at the current state of upselling in the United States and North America as well, what are you seeing when it comes to what this revenue strategy is today, and where that could be improved?
Yeah, it's very interesting. What we're seeing across the United States is still a big reliance on static revenue strategies. And let's not forget that upselling happens both pre-arrival at the moment of booking, but as well at the moment of arrival. So that is literally the translation of a static revenue management or pricing strategy on upselling is lifting a keyboard as a front desk agent, when the guest, standing in front of me, just lifting a keyboard to see what's taped underneath as the grid of supplements that were created, if everything is fine, maybe 6 months ago, maybe a year ago, maybe by the previous revenue manager that just, remembered to actually print these out and stick them. So I think having a static pricing strategy is actually a big risk, specifically for the dynamic world of today. That's definitely where I'm seeing some improvements to be done, specifically because the potential is actually so much higher, both from a dynamic. It doesn't have to be just the wrong price and less or too cheap, right? It could also be that you're actually pricing way too high, but the guest has Expedia on their phone, and they can very simply and quickly actually check that whatever you've pitched to them is twice as much as what they can find online. So I think extremely educated travelers, very connected travelers, and an already implemented very dynamic revenue pricing strategy means that you have to implement this in upselling too. And there's a lot of work to be done on that aspect, definitely.
Yeah, and I'm a strong believer that each of the different room classes that you have at your hotel have their own unique demand patterns. So when you're looking at pricing your upsells solely off of the base room category, you're not taking into account that there may be significantly higher demand for whatever amenity you have or attribute you have, such as an ocean view or an upgraded bedding type or something of that nature. And when you're able to match what you're offering from a pricing standpoint with the demand, that's where you're going to ultimately find the best results when it comes to being able to unlock this really untapped potential at your hotel.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you that every room class has a specific demand pattern. And one thing that is not to be forgotten is that demand pattern is also not unique. It's not just the initial booking that's there, right? Upselling unlocks a second wallet, and that one is driven by emotions much more than by the 50 or 60 tabs that are open before I know exactly which room or which hotel will I actually book initially. Yeah. Once the booking is secured, that's when you actually open a lot more opportunities that are, once again, actually driven by something different than just the logic. And this is where it's so interesting to be creative, to play around, right? Because there is a lot of different levers that can be used to influence certain decisions in order for your guests to actually have a better experience. And if it just so happens that they have to spend more in order to get that experience, well, so be it.
Exactly. And the perception of value is key here, right? So it's not just looking at the price sensitivity of the guest at the time of booking, right? You're able to capture that guest when you offer them the right rate at the right time, at the right, for the right room. But ultimately, it could be 15 days later, or even 30 days later when they're coming up on their trip. That perception of value changes. All of a sudden, now they're saying, I have a different perception of what I actually want to achieve here. When they booked, they may have only wanted to get that base room category, but there is opportunity to either book better experiences or better room categories right there. And how do we make sure we have that right price is going to be important to match that perception of value.
Absolutely, at that specific moment, because the needs and the wants of a guest are very different depending on where they are in the journey. So actually don't, inundate them with too many choices at the moment of booking. Rather, keep some up for later on after the booking is secured. That is absolutely so important. And that perception of value is a huge determiner on whether that conversion will happen or not. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's there's a large food and beverage chain here in the United States that has an over 40-page menu. So you can imagine what that's like. And so imagine doing that when you're booking a hotel, you might end up scaring them away. So
I mean, if we would print out some of the booking engines with the different rates and the different room class and even the different restrictions, and you add a loyalty membership on top of that, might be even 40 pages if you print it out.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but for me, it's hard sometimes to even pick where to go to dinner when you have two people. Imagine having two people going on a trip. So it's hard to make the decision when there's 50 choices. So
absolutely.
One of the things that we talked a little bit about at the start was how do we make sure we have the right metrics to empower our teams to be able to do this and make sure that we're focused on profitability. When we look at the revenue team that's potentially setting these rates and starting to be more dynamic, what can they do from a revenue leader's perspective to connect with others on property to make sure that the guest experience is exceptional, not just from the time of booking, but all the way through their journey to when they check in and even check out? How can the revenue leader get more involved in that to make this successful?
I love that question. I think that this is really what the beauty of upselling is inside of the revenue kind of category. It is a collaboration function after all, because the revenue manager on their own or director of revenue on their own can obviously, set the right price, set the right product, but there needs to be the right execution, the right fulfillment that actually happens. So what is, communication, collaboration is so important. And I think it's the role of the revenue leader to actually create a revenue culture inside of the hotel. And that goes way beyond the revenue reservations team, maybe front office team, the F&B team, the spa team, if there is one. But even the porters, having a revenue-minded culture, which is not just nickel and diming, but actually providing value, once again, to a guest that will be on property and that is actually having the experience, is so, so crucial. And I think this turns into, when we look at the team impact that this has, even further than just increasing revenue and increasing reviews, because let's be honest, a guest that stays in a high room category, for example, has a great experience, will leave a higher review. Therefore, you can ask for a higher price in the future. There's also something very, very interesting when it comes to upselling, which is team morale. And a happy team will provide a great experience to the guests. So definitely speaking about revenue culture, revenue-minded culture, front office team, create a great incentive, a great upsell program that you actually put in place so that your team can earn twice, maybe 3 times their salary if they're doing a great job in incentive and commission. And guess what? They'll stay with you. They will actually stay and keep on doing an amazing job at welcoming the guests. So I think that's where the revenue leaders have a role, maybe not to drive entirely the program, but at least to initiate it and to keep the pulse on the results, because at the end of the day, this is, again, what will make the profit of that property.
Beautiful. When we're looking at the front desk agent's experience when it comes to upselling, so we've explored a little bit about the booking journey at the time of booking up until they arrive. But when it comes to the front desk agent and being able to upsell, what do you find is the most successful strategy to empower them to have the most success in that, right? That's really one of our final opportunities to be able to extract more total value out of the guest.
For sure. And I think there, having had already, we talked about menu, having had an opportunity upfront to actually propose and allow the guests to discover everything that's on the menu, even though they don't order pre-arrival, they at least are aware of it at the moment of check-in. And that's a great reminder to actually block conversion. So this is something that we're seeing is very, very strong. That's one of the items where Oaky brings the confidence of these front desk agents up. And confidence is the term. It is so important from someone welcoming a guest to feel confident about their product. So product knowledge, knowing which room, how does the breakfast look like? What is that person's, literally the front desk agent's favorite meal in the restaurant? By knowing what they talk about, they can actually sell it and inspire the guests. I think an incentive program is absolutely needed. It's definitely something that we've seen huge results from the moment this is implemented. Also great way to reward specific mindsets. And finally, it's about consistency. So having a champion, which might be the front office manager, might be the assistant front office manager, but someone that's really driven to actually keep on monitoring, on pulsing, on training if needed, is really, really crucial there. But the opportunities are really huge. So even for, and we know it's very difficult with the staff turnover that our industry is discovering, but it really makes an entire difference when you can attract talent that actually enjoys their work and also get rewarded for it.
100%, right? And many of us love being in the hospitality industry. At the same time, we're also here for a career, and part of a career is to make a living. So definitely look forward to seeing a lot of successful front desk agents as they implement these strategies and these incentive programs. One of the items that we talked about was going from the static to the dynamic piece in terms of upselling and empowering not only your front desk agents, but empowering your whole upsell strategy with dynamic pricing. What have you seen in your last few years with Oaky when it comes to moving from a static environment where saying this upgrade is always $20 or $30 more to a more dynamic demand-based environment that looks at the demand for each of your individual room classes?
I mean, it's very easy. I'll just give one number, 35%. 35% increase in revenue. From the moment you turn on the dynamic pricing, that's the increase of revenue that we see.
Beautiful. And so I mentioned earlier that we've heard the term total revenue, and we want to grow total revenue constantly at all these different conferences that we've attended in the industry. And you just heard it there, using upsell programs, using dynamic demand-based pricing has increased revenue by 35%. And that is one crucial avenue that you can look at. And it's really been untapped in our industry to drive better revenue at your hotels. Clément, did you have any key takeaways that you wanted to share for the group as we wrap up here?
For sure. Don't overlook upselling as a competitive, as a secret weapon to actually increase the RevPAR and ADR and profitability. Make sure that this remains collaborative, so engage with your teams and have fun. This is really an opportunity to actually be creative, to test things, to try out, and to have a direct engagement with your guests.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time today, Clément. We're definitely looking forward to many of you today on the stream, taking advantage of being able to unlock this revenue stream. And we look forward to hearing your success stories. Thank you all.
Thank you, Anthony. Thanks.